I didn't expect to find longing again. Not in my late 30s, and certainly not in the house of a man who still wore his grief like a second skin. My name is Corinne. I'm a physical therapist by trade, but for the past 3 years, I've worked primarily with palliative care patients. I tell myself that it's because I believe in dignity, in comfort, in easing the pain others carry. And maybe that's true. But part of me wonders if I'm drawn to sorrow because I've carried so much of it myself. That's how I met Ellis Callahan. His wife, Noelle, was one of my patients. She had a degenerative neuromuscular condition, relentless, cruel, and without mercy. I saw her 3 times a week for over a year. She was quiet but sharp, her body failing while her mind remained painfully intact. Sometimes, I think that was the worst part for her. Ellis was always there when I arrived. Always. A man of few words and fewer expressions. He watched every session like a sentinel, eyes distant, arms folded. But his presence wasn't oppressive. It was grounding. Like he was holding her pain so she didn't have to hold it alone. Their daughter, Miriam, was 23 then, studying marine biology across the country. I only met her twice, both times around the holidays. The real constant in the house, besides Ellis, was Vaughn. Vaughn was Noelle's stepson. 24, tall and lean with a restlessness that hung off him like steam from hot pavement. He wasn't Ellis's biological son, but they had bonded in a way that transcended blood. Vaughn didn't say much either, but when he did, it was with the kind of slow, deliberate wit that made you feel like the world paused for his sentence to land. He wasn't around much, just on breaks from grad school. But when he was, he stayed near his stepmother, played her old jazz records, helped her to the bathroom, held her hand when the tremors started. I watched him once, just for a second too long. It was in the middle of February. Noelle was dozing after a massage, the living room quiet except for the soft scratch of Coltrane on the record player. I was putting my equipment away, and Vaughn was standing at the window, the sunset catching the amber in his hair. He turned suddenly and caught my gaze. Not startled. Not coy. Just seeing me. Something shifted. I told myself it was nothing. After Noelle passed, I didn't expect to see any of them again. But 2 months later, Ellis called me. His voice was scratchy with sleep and emotion. He asked if I'd come back, not for therapy, but to help him manage the house, the transition, the grief that kept clinging to the walls. He offered payment. I said no. I moved in by April. Miriam returned that summer to help clear out her mother's things. She was a bomb, bright and curious and thoughtful. We became fast friends, even though she was closer to Vaughn's age than mine. She called me Corey, and we shared glasses of wine on the back porch in the humid evenings. Sometimes, I saw her watching her father when he didn't notice. Her face a tangle of loss and unasked questions. Vaughn arrived later, mid-July. He was supposed to stay for 2 weeks. He stayed for 3 months. The energy shifted again. He was polite, reserved. But I felt his gaze like a draft through an open door, unexpected and cool against my skin. We rarely spoke at length, but when we did, it was always in the evening, in the kitchen, with the hum of the fridge filling the silences between us. "Do you miss her?" he asked one night, his voice barely above the clink of ice in his glass. I nodded. "Every day." He tilted his head, studying me. "You saw her more than we did, toward the end." I met his eyes. "She talked about you." "A lot." He smiled. "Just barely. Hope it wasn't all bad." It never was. That was all. But something had begun, something nameless, unwelcome, and irrevocably alive. By early August, the house had settled into a strange rhythm. Ellis returned to work part-time. Miriam left for a field study in Baja. Vaughn and I stayed. It was late one Friday when I came down to the kitchen for water and found Vaughn there, barefoot, eating toast over the sink. The light above him cast long shadows, and his t-shirt clung to the planes of his chest in a way that was distracting in ways I didn't want to admit. "You ever sleep?" he asked, handing me the pitcher from the fridge. "Not lately." "Same." He moved aside so I could fill my glass. His hand brushed mine as I reached for it, and neither of us moved. "Corinne," he said, my full name this time, like a question. I looked up. There was space. So much space. He was Ellis's stepson. This was his house. I was just a woman trying to help. A woman too old to be having thoughts like this. I should go back to bed, I whispered. He didn't stop me, but his eyes followed me all the way up the stairs. And that night, I didn't sleep at all. There are moments in life that don't feel like choices, moments that unfold with the slow, deliberate grace of inevitability. After that night in the kitchen, something between Vaughn and me shifted. It wasn't obvious. There were no lingering stares over breakfast, no whispered words passed like secrets. But something invisible had settled between us, humming under the surface. The day after, Ellis left for a conference in Chicago. He asked me to stay behind, to keep an eye on things, to manage the garden, the mail, the silence he couldn't face coming back to. Vaughn stayed too, for reasons he didn't explain. That night, I found him in the backyard, leaning against the railing of the old deck, barefoot and shirtless, sipping something from a flask. The moon was a sliver above us, thin and sharp as a memory. "You ever wonder if grief rewires us?" he asked when he saw me. I wrapped my sweater tighter around my frame. "Every day." He nodded, then gestured to the sky. Noelle used to say the moon always looked lonelier when it was only a sliver. Like it forgot how to be whole. I joined him at the railing, the wood cool beneath my hands. She was poetic. She was a lot of things. He paused. "And so are you." I didn't respond. Not out loud. The air around us felt thick, August humidity mixing with something older, heavier. Something we hadn't earned the right to name. We stood in silence, watching the breeze ripple across the grass like a whisper only the night could hear. Then he said, softly, "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." I turned. "Ellis?" Vaughn's eyes didn't waver. "My stepfather isn't the kind of man who lets people in. But you're already part of this place. I don't belong here. You do. That's the problem." He looked away first. Later, inside, I heard him moving around in the kitchen, drawers opening, a faucet running, a single chair scraping the floor. I stayed in the hallway just out of sight, one hand pressed to the wall like I needed it to hold me up. He didn't call for me, but I wanted him to. Instead, I went upstairs and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep. Again. By morning, everything had returned to normal. Or the version of normal we pretended to understand. He cooked eggs. I made coffee. The silence was friendly easy. It was a lie. That evening, I found a note on the table. Back around 10. Meeting Grant. V. No signature. Just that single looping letter. I stared at it longer than I needed to. When he returned, it was after midnight. I was in the living room, curled up with a book I hadn't turned a page in for an hour. He walked in quietly, his hair damp from the night air, smelling faintly of gin and wind. "You waited up?" he asked, his voice low. I couldn't sleep. He stood there for a moment, just watching me. Not hungry, not expectant. Just watching. "Do you want me to sit?" he asked. And somehow, impossibly, I said yes. We sat in silence for so long I forgot what it was like to be alone. Finally, he said, "You remind me of her. But not in the way you think." "Noelle?" He nodded. "She had this. Gravity. She made people orbit her without trying. You're like that." I stared at the flames dancing in the fireplace. "It's not gravity. It's guilt." He tilted his head. "You think you don't deserve to be seen." "No. I think I don't deserve to be wanted." He didn't reach for me. He didn't have to. His words were enough. "You're wrong." I looked at him then, really looked. And there it was again. That pull. That electric impossibility. I stood first. I always did when it felt like too much. As I moved past him to the stairs, his fingers brushed mine. Not enough to stop me. Just enough to remember. Ellis came back on a Wednesday. The flight was late, the skies thick with clouds that promised rain, but offered none. When I opened the door, he looked tired, creased shirt, hair disheveled, briefcase in one hand. But he smiled when he saw me. Not just polite. Genuine. "You stayed," he said, like he hadn't expected it. I nodded, stepping aside. "You asked." He passed me gently, his hand brushing my shoulder in a way that felt like both a thank you and an apology. Vaughn was upstairs when his stepfather arrived, but he came down a few minutes later, barefoot, hair damp from the shower, wearing a shirt I was almost certain had once belonged to Ellis. "Hey, old man," he said, reaching for a bottle of water. Ellis chuckled. "You redecorate while I was gone?" "Just the playlist," Vaughn replied, smirking. I made tea while they spoke, listened more than I participated. The conversation was light, easy, but under it, something else. Vaughn didn't look at me. Not once. But Ellis did. Later that night, the three of us shared dinner around the long wooden table Noelle once insisted was too large for such a small family. Ellis asked about the garden. Vaughn answered. Ellis asked about the leak in the ceiling. I answered. He watched us both the way someone watches fire, closely, quietly, unsure if it's going to warm the room or burn it down. When dinner ended, Ellis stayed behind to rinse dishes. Vaughn vanished, mumbling something about needing to answer emails. I stood at the threshold of the kitchen, hands still damp from drying the wine glasses. Is something wrong? Ellis asked, his back still turned. No. He turned off the faucet, turned to face me. Then why do you look like you're standing at the edge of something? I laughed, quiet and brittle. That's dramatic. Even for you. He stepped forward. Close. His hand reached for mine, not to hold, but to steady. You don't owe me loyalty, he said softly. I blinked. What? I see how he looks at you. I see how you pretend not to notice. My breath hitched. Ellis tilted his head. He's not a boy, Corinne. No, he's not. You're allowed to want things. His voice was calm. Even the things you think you shouldn't. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with such gentle familiarity it nearly unraveled me. Then, with a quiet smile, he said, I'm going to bed. You should too. I stood there long after he left. The house felt different, like everyone had just stopped pretending they couldn't feel the tension radiating through the walls. Upstairs, the hallway was dim. I passed Ellis's closed door, then paused outside the other. Vaughn's. My hand hovered just above the wood. But I didn't knock. I turned away. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake until dawn, watching light unfurl across the ceiling like forgiveness. The next day, things returned to their curated normal. Ellis read the paper. Vaughn went for a run. I sorted through boxes of Noelle's old books for donation. But by nightfall, the weight of everything unsaid was pressing on my chest like a second heartbeat. That's when Vaughn found me in the study, thumbing through a stack of medical journals I hadn't touched in years. He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. You've been avoiding me. I've been busy. Don't lie, Corey. It doesn't suit you. I closed the folder. What do you want me to say? That I didn't imagine it, he said, stepping closer. That it wasn't just a charged moment by the fireplace or some late-night illusion. He stopped in front of me. Close. Not touching. I didn't imagine it, I said, barely above a whisper. He exhaled slowly, as though he'd been holding his breath for weeks. But it can't happen, I added. Not like this. His gaze didn't flicker. Why? Because it's complicated. Because your father. He's not my father. But he brought me here. Vaughn shook his head. No. You brought yourself. And you stayed. For all the right reasons. And maybe some of the wrong ones. The room felt too small. The walls too thin. My convictions even thinner. Then he said it, so simply I almost missed the significance. I'm not trying to claim you, Corinne. I'm just tired of pretending I don't see you. The door opened behind us. Ellis. He stood in the hall, holding a glass of water, his gaze unreadable. For a long second, no one moved. Then he smiled, small, knowing, almost amused. Careful, he said, voice quiet. Books aren't the only things that catch fire in this house. And he walked away. The house was still the next morning. Ellis left early, a note on the counter, not a word spoken. Back late. Don't wait up. Vaughn wasn't home either. His car was gone. No explanation. It felt like I'd been handed silence and asked to read between the lines. I spent most of the day in the sunroom, sorting through Noelle's final journals. They were full of clipped phrases and disjointed thoughts, fragments of clarity she must have written down before her muscles stopped obeying her hands. One sentence stuck with me. Don't be afraid of the person you become after grief. I didn't know what she meant until now. By evening, I stepped out into the garden, barefoot, the grass cool beneath my toes. The lavender was in bloom again. Noelle's favorite. She used to insist we clip a few sprigs every week, dry them on the porch, and tuck them into books we'd never finish. I was leaning over the herb beds when I heard his voice. You're always moving when you want to be still. I straightened. Vaughn stood behind me, hands in his pockets, hair wind-tossed. There was something quieter in his posture tonight, less fire, more ache. I needed air, I said. He nodded. Me too. We didn't move. Just watched the shadows stretch between the trees. Then, softly, I talked to him. My breath hitched. Ellis? He nodded. He told me something strange. Something I haven't stopped thinking about. I turned fully now. What did he say? That he's not afraid of what happens next. Not anymore. That grief cracked something open in him, and for once, he's not trying to glue it shut. He took a step toward me. Then another. He said, if I wanted to stay here, with you, I should. I blinked. What? He said you've always belonged to yourself. That whatever comes next, it should be your choice. I felt dizzy. And what did you say? I asked. Vaughn looked at me then, and I saw it, all of it. Every moment we'd tried not to name. The hunger. The restraint. The reverence. I said I don't want to leave. Not if you're still here. The wind rose and fell around us, rustling the trees like a sigh the earth had been holding in. I didn't move. Not yet. So he did. He crossed the distance between us and stood so close I could feel the warmth from his skin, the quiet thrum of his hope barely hidden beneath his breath. You don't have to say anything, he whispered. But if you want to be wanted, really wanted. I want you. He wasn't 24 in that moment. He wasn't Ellis's stepson. He wasn't part of a memory or a mistake. He was simply a man, asking me to be seen. And I had never felt more alive. I reached for his hand. He closed his fingers around mine. And that was all. We didn't kiss. We didn't speak. We just stood in the garden as the night fell gently around us, the stars slow to appear, like they were waiting for us to notice them. 2 weeks later, Miriam returned. She noticed it right away, not the physical closeness, but the absence of the ache in my eyes. She pulled me aside in the hallway. You look different, she said. I feel different. She studied me for a beat, then smiled. Good. You deserve that. She didn't ask more. Didn't need to. Ellis and I stood on the back porch one night, watching the boys rebuild the broken railing. Vaughn hammering, laughing at something Miriam said. His sleeves rolled to the elbow, sawdust in his hair. Ellis handed me a glass of wine. He didn't say much. Just leaned on the post beside me. Then, quietly, you saved us. I looked at him. No. I just didn't leave. He turned to me, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled, small, rueful. You're not mine, he said gently, but God, I was lucky to love you. I reached for his hand. And this time, I was the one to hold his. Life didn't become simple after that. Vaughn and I took our time. Let the world misunderstand. Let the silence stretch and settle where it needed to. Ellis never interfered. Miriam stayed quiet. Love, when it's not trying to fit into someone else's shape, is a strange and beautiful thing. It doesn't always arrive with trumpets or declarations. Sometimes it just shows up in the quiet hours. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes, just sometimes, it walks into the garden, barefoot, with lavender tucked behind its ear, and says, I see you. And I'm not afraid.